Richard adjusted the sterling silver cutlery one last time, the gentle clink of knives and forks echoing in the cavernous dining room. Candles flickered in crystal holders, casting a warm golden glow over the polished mahogany table. The turkey, perfectly browned and steaming, sat at the center, surrounded by meticulously arranged side dishes. On the surface, everything was perfect. Every detail in its place, every light angled to flatter, every napkin folded to precision. But as he stepped back to admire his work, a cold knot twisted in his stomach. He could not pinpoint it, not yet, but there was something off about Vanessa. Her laughter this morning had sounded a shade too forced, her eyes avoiding his when she spoke. Richard shook the thought away and focused on the meal. The family arriving in a few hours would expect nothing less than perfection. That was his domain. Control, elegance, appearances. But today, that sense of mastery was brittle, fragile under some unspoken weight. "Everything smells amazing," Vanessa said, her voice light, musical, though Richard noticed a tension beneath it. She brushed a stray curl from her face and smiled, though her smile did not reach her eyes. "You really outdid yourself this year." "Only the best for our family," Richard replied, forcing warmth into his tone. He poured the cranberry sauce into a crystal dish, watching the deep red swirl like blood in water, a detail that made him momentarily shiver. "I thought you'd enjoy the new recipe, stuffing with chestnuts and sage. I spent hours on it yesterday." She laughed softly. "You always make it seem effortless." Her eyes flicked away, lingering briefly on the hallway leading to the guest rooms. Richard's chest tightened. Something in that glance gnawed at him. A hesitation, a secret perhaps. He tried to mask it with a smile. He moved through the kitchen, checking each tray and dish. Everything gleamed. The roast skin was crisp, golden brown. The mashed potatoes held just the right creaminess. The scent of rosemary, thyme, and roasted vegetables filled the air. He paused at the wine rack, selecting a rich Cabernet to accompany the meal, the cork popping with a satisfying sound that briefly eased his nerves. A distant laugh drifted down from the living room. Vanessa, speaking on the phone, her tone casual, unburdened. Yet the words were clipped, measured. Richard's brow furrowed. He told himself it was nothing, that his mind was playing tricks, but he could not ignore the feeling, that faint, insidious pull of unease threading through the warm comfort of their home. As he returned to the dining table to adjust the centerpiece, a chill ran through him despite the room's warmth. Candles reflected in the polished silver, each flame dancing and warping, as if mocking him. He straightened, inhaling deeply, focusing on the familiar scent of roasted turkey and spiced cider. He needed composure. He needed the perfect veneer. And, yet beneath it all, a question whispered in the back of his mind, unbidden. What if today everything went wrong? Richard glanced toward the hallway where Vanessa had disappeared moments ago. The house seemed quieter now, the hum of domestic preparation punctuated by the ticking of the antique clock. He shook his head, dismissing the unease, though it lingered, coiling in the corners of his mind. He would find out soon enough. Tonight's Thanksgiving would be unforgettable, but not in the way anyone imagined. Richard had convinced himself the unease from this morning was just nerves, the pressure of hosting, the weight of appearances. But the moment he picked up his phone to double-check the guest list, everything changed. A notification blinked across the screen, a message from an unknown number that he did not recognize. Curiosity won over caution. The message was brief, almost casual. "Congrats, Vanessa. Can't wait to meet the little one. Love, Derek." Richard's hand froze mid-scroll. Derek, his brother, his wife's brother. And then the words hit him with the force of a hammer. Vanessa was pregnant. Not with his child. His chest tightened, the room spinning around him, turkey scent and candlelight warping into a nauseating blur. He sank onto a dining chair, the fine upholstery pressing against his palms. Every polished surface, every gleaming dish seemed suddenly grotesque. The world didn't make sense. Betrayal carved its first jagged line through the perfection of his life. His mind raced in loops, trying to reconcile the cheerful, familiar face of Vanessa he had seen just moments ago with the unthinkable secret the text revealed. Vanessa's voice called from the kitchen. "Richard, everything okay?" Her casual tone grated on his nerves. He forced a small smile and rose, tucking the phone into his pocket as if it were nothing. "Yes, everything's fine. Just checking on the cranberry sauce." "Of course," she said, her smile warm, unaware of the storm brewing inside him. Richard's gaze lingered on her for a moment too long, analyzing every feature, every gesture. She moved like she always did, graceful, confident. But now there was a hidden depth he could not ignore, an invisible current he had never noticed. He walked to the hallway, staring at family portraits lining the walls, his parents smiling, faces, snapshots of birthdays, vacations, celebrations. Each image, once comforting, now seemed to mock him. The picture of him and Vanessa on their wedding day, her laughing in his arms, felt like a cruel joke. The thought that Derek had violated the sanctity of their marriage twisted in his mind, like a living thing. Richard's heartbeat thudded in his ears as he returned to the kitchen. The roasted turkey seemed to steam more violently than before, its aroma cloying and oppressive. He opened the oven, checking the temperature, though he hardly registered it. Every measured movement was mechanical, his mind elsewhere. The idea of Vanessa's betrayal played over and over, like a film on an endless loop, each detail sharper, more agonizing. "Are you sure you're all right?" Vanessa asked again, a hint of concern creeping into her voice. She reached out, touching his arm lightly. Her hand should have been comforting. Instead, it felt like a trigger, sparking something dark and feral deep within him. Richard swallowed, forcing a laugh he didn't feel. "Yes, everything's perfect. Just busy, you know?" He returned her touch with a nod, hiding the roiling mixture of anger, grief, and disbelief. He excused himself to the study, closing the door behind him. He sank into the leather chair, hands trembling. Thoughts of vengeance, once foreign to him, now whispered seductively. He envisioned conversations he would never have, confrontations that would never occur, all swirling with the possibility of control he had always wielded over his life. Hours passed in a haze of fevered contemplation. The warm glow of the house contrasted sharply with the chill coursing through his veins. The perfect Thanksgiving, the one he had painstakingly orchestrated, now felt like a stage set for tragedy. His mind, meticulous and calculating, began to plan, not yet in action, but in thought. Every detail of the evening, every dish, every smile, every toast could be manipulated, used as a weapon. Richard finally rose, his reflection in the polished dining room mirror catching his eyes. Dark, burning, aware of the transformation taking root. Vanessa was in the kitchen, humming softly, oblivious to the hurricane in her husband's mind. He looked at the text in his pocket one last time, a silent acknowledgement of the world that had shifted irrevocably. Tonight, nothing would be the same. The veneer of domestic bliss had cracked, and beneath it lay something dangerous, calculating, and merciless. And Richard knew, though he did not yet know how, the events of this Thanksgiving would be unforgettable. Richard wandered through the house as if sleepwalking, the faint hum of the dishwasher and the soft crackle of the fireplace, barely registering. The golden light of the dining room, which had once felt warm and reassuring, now cast long, sinister shadows along the polished floors. Each reflection in the mirrors seemed distorted, mocking him, twisting the familiar into something alien. His mind replayed Derek's text endlessly, Vanessa's laughter, her secret glance, and the life that had been quietly stolen from him. He found himself in the kitchen again, staring at the knife block. His hands, steady when carving the turkey moments ago, now trembled slightly. A darker thought took root, tentatively at first, then with insistent clarity. If everything had been stripped from him, if betrayal had infiltrated the very walls, of his home, then he needed to act, to regain control, to restore order. Richard opened a drawer and found a small envelope tucked behind the cutlery, a remnant from a previous mundane errand. Inside was a clear crystalline powder, harmless in appearance, yet deadly in precise measure. He had acquired it months ago under the guise of a culinary experiment. His meticulous mind began mapping the possibilities. A few grains in the stuffing, a sprinkle on the mashed potatoes, a discreet dusting in the wine. Vanessa's voice drifted down the hallway. "Richard, are you still in here?" Her tone was casual, but curiosity threaded through it. He forced a smile, though no warmth reached his eyes. "Just checking the dessert. Make sure everything is ready for your family." "Of course," she replied, unaware. Her footsteps retreated toward the living room, humming a soft tune. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, breathing in the cinnamon and nutmeg from the pies. They smelled comforting, ordinary, a perfect contrast to the storm raging inside him. Hours passed in a feverish blur of preparation. Richard moved through the kitchen with mechanical precision, arranging dishes, garnishing platters, all while his thoughts circled the betrayal like a predator stalking prey. Each gesture, each adjustment was purposeful, not just to maintain the appearance of a perfect Thanksgiving, but to prepare the stage for the retribution he envisioned. The turkey's skin glistened under the overhead lights, rosemary sprigs tucked between slices. Like soldiers ready for inspection, the cranberries gleamed like blood, dark and glossy, while the wine shimmered in crystal glasses, waiting to be poured. Richard imagined the chaos that could unfold with just a subtle, invisible addition. A powder so small it would escape notice, until the effects revealed themselves. Yet even as the plan solidified in his mind, Richard wrestled with a strange duality. He loved Vanessa, had loved her fiercely, and that love twisted inside him, feeding both rage and sorrow. He saw her in the kitchen, arranging silverware with delicate precision, blissfully unaware that her secret had shattered the foundation of their marriage. He wanted to scream, to cry, to unravel her world as his had unraveled. But he also wanted her to understand, to feel the weight of what she had done. He paused at the wine rack, selecting 2 bottles of deep Cabernet. The corks popped with a satisfying pop, a sound that seemed almost too cheerful against the dark rhythm of his thoughts. He poured a small taste into a glass, swirling it carefully. "Perfect," he murmured. The wine was rich, tannic, full-bodied, the ideal vehicle, the perfect mask for something lethal. The house remained tranquil, a deceptive calm settling over the rooms. Vanessa moved like a dancer through the kitchen, checking pies, adjusting, table settings humming. Richard observed from the doorway, the poison in his pocket like a hidden buzzing pulse. His eyes followed her every movement, noting every gesture, every smile, every laugh that now seemed imbued with treachery. He rehearsed it in his mind, the first grains into the stuffing, the whispered chaos of confusion, the subtle collapse of order. Each imagined scenario unfolded with cinematic clarity. Vanessa gasping, Derek clutching his stomach, the other family members bewildered. And through it all, Richard would remain the composed orchestrator, the quiet hand guiding the inevitable disaster. A final glance around the kitchen and he straightened. Every plate gleamed, every glass caught the light perfectly, every utensil aligned. Thanksgiving was ready. Only one thing remained invisible, unseen. A decision that would forever alter the lives gathered in this house. Richard's reflection caught in the polished oven door. A man he barely recognized stared back, eyes dark, intense, calculating. The calm, meticulous husband of yesterday had vanished. Tonight, perfection would mask something far darker. And when the family arrived, when the laughter and clinking of glasses began, the stage would be set. The driveway shimmered under the late afternoon sun, sleek SUVs and luxury sedans glinting against the manicured lawn. Richard watched from the bay window, a glass of Cabernet in hand, as the first guests approached. Derek was the first out of the car, laughing easily, oblivious to the storm that had been silently brewing in the house for months. Vanessa met him at the door, her smile radiant, unaware of how precariously balanced the evening had already become. "Derek! Over here!" Vanessa called, her voice warm, inviting. She threw her arms around her brother, the kind of embrace that used to make Richard's chest swell with contentment. Now, it only fanned the embers of something darker. Richard set down his glass and adjusted the cuff of his shirt. He smiled politely as each arriving guest, cousins, aunts, uncles, and distant family friends, streamed into the foyer. Each handshake, each embrace seemed to mask an undercurrent of rivalry and history, little tensions simmering beneath forced smiles. Richard's mind catalogued them all. Uncle Peter, whose thinly veiled contempt had always grated. Aunt Marcy, who loved to needle. Vanessa subtly. The cousins who fought for the spotlight at every gathering. The door opened again, and more family arrived, laughter spilling into the house, voices echoing against the high ceilings. Richard's meticulous attention to detail extended beyond the table. Every seat, every setting, every gleam of glassware had been curated for this day. And yet, the perfect veneer began to crack under the weight of his suspicion and mounting rage. He moved through the crowd with the ease of a practiced host, his hands steady, his smiles measured. "Derek, glad you could make it," he said, his voice light but carefully modulated. Derek clapped him on the shoulder, laughing. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." Vanessa leaned in, whispering something about the stuffing, and Richard nodded absently, his eyes flicking to her face. The warmth in her expression, the familiar motions of domestic grace, struck him like a knife. How could she carry such a secret while moving so effortlessly through the ordinary rhythms of life? Dinner preparations continued with practiced efficiency. Richard guided the guests to the dining room, each step choreographed to maintain the illusion of normalcy. He noted micro-expressions, tiny gestures, a flicker of discomfort, a hesitant glance, a forced laugh, and catalogued them silently. To anyone else, he was the perfect host, calm, confident, in control. Inside, he was unraveling, each smile masking a storm of thoughts that churned like wildfire. As everyone took their seats, Derek made a joke about the pregnancy, unaware of Richard's knowledge. A polite laugh from the table filled the room, but Richard's hand tightened around his napkin. A cold, calculated pulse ran through him. Vanessa's laughter, light and unsuspecting, made his chest ache with a strange combination of grief and rage. He kept his composure, letting the comments slide like water off a stone, but the seed of darker thoughts had been planted, taking root. The smell of the roast turkey, now carried through the room, mingled with the spicy aroma of pies cooling on the sideboard. Crystal glasses caught the late afternoon sunlight, casting fractured reflections across the faces of the family, painting the room in shards of gold and amber. The elegance of the home, high ceilings, marble counters, ornate fixtures, added a surreal beauty to the mounting tension, making the space feel both safe and ominous at once. Small talk began to fill the gaps, a delicate dance of pleasantries masking underlying hostilities. Richard's eyes scanned the table constantly, calculating the slightest opportunities, noting vulnerabilities, recording the details that might later be exploited. Each laugh, each comment, each glance between Vanessa and Derek became a mental trigger, a reminder of the betrayal simmering beneath the surface. By the time the first drinks were poured and plates were served, Richard had rehearsed every step of the evening in his mind, anticipating the ebb and flow of conversation, the subtle shifts of power, the micro-dramas that would unfold. The family was here. The stage was set. And beneath the veneer of laughter and civility, a storm was quietly gathering, unseen but inevitable. Richard's reflection in the polished silver tray caught his eye, dark and calculating. He straightened, masking the inner tension with a polite nod as Vanessa poured wine for the table. Tonight, every smile, every toast, every bite would carry more weight than anyone could imagine. Vanessa paused mid-pour, her hand hovering over the wine glass. She noticed Richard standing at the head of the table, his posture perfect, yet something about him felt off. The calm precision, the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his eyes scanned every guest with an intensity she had never seen before. A flicker of unease stirred within her, but she dismissed it, attributing it to the stress of hosting. Richard, for his part, felt the tension coiling inside him like a living thing. He had rehearsed this day countless times in his mind, yet nothing could have prepared him for the sight of Vanessa laughing, carefree, whispering with Derek about the baby that should never have existed. Each soft laugh, each bright smile, felt like a betrayal written in fire across the walls of his carefully ordered world. He moved gracefully among the guests, offering polite words, subtle compliments, his smile flawless. To them, he was the consummate host, attentive, charming, seemingly untroubled. But in the depths of his mind, he calculated, measured, considered. Every gesture, every word, every glance from Vanessa and Derek became a potential pivot in the quiet storm that had begun to brew. Vanessa noticed a flicker of shadow in his eyes, a small tension in his shoulders. "Richard, are you feeling all right?" she asked softly, leaning closer as if to gauge his mood. Her concern was genuine, but in the intimate closeness of her voice, it sounded like both a warning and an invitation. "I'm fine," he replied smoothly, his tone calm, almost soothing. "Just keeping an eye on everything." He allowed a polite smile to curve across his lips, but it did not reach his eyes. The guests, unaware of the undercurrent, continued their chatter, the clinking of silverware and soft laughter filling the dining room. Derek, oblivious to Richard's growing inner turmoil, made another joke, this time about the timing of Vanessa's pregnancy. Laughter rippled around the table, polite but nervous. Richard's hand tightened around his napkin. The humour should have been harmless, yet to him it was an affront, a reminder of the life being stolen from him, a symbol of betrayal made flesh. Vanessa's brow furrowed as she watched him. "Richard, you're scowling," she said gently, reaching for his hand. Her touch should have been grounding, comforting, but instead it sent a jolt through him, a spark of dark awareness. He withdrew slightly, masking his reaction with a nod. "Just thinking," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. The tension began to seep into the room, subtle yet undeniable. Aunt Marcy's eyes darted to Richard, sensing something different. Uncle Peter coughed nervously, perhaps imagined conflicts in the polished house. The family had arrived expecting laughter and warmth, but the air had shifted imperceptibly. Shadows seemed longer, reflections sharper, every polished surface gleaming with an eerie clarity. Richard moved back to the wine, swirling it in his glass, studying its deep red hue. The rich colour, the aroma of berries and oak, calmed him momentarily. Yet even as he observed it, his mind plotted, visualized, and rehearsed. The evening was still young. Every conversation, every movement, every bite could be orchestrated to serve a purpose. Vanessa noticed the shift, but could not name it. There was something meticulous, almost predatory, in the way he looked around the table. Something beneath the veneer of charm and hospitality that she did not understand. Her heart fluttered uneasily. She had known Richard for years, thought she knew every facet of him. Yet tonight, there was a part of him she had never seen. A quiet intensity that hinted at depths both dark and deliberate. The first course was served, and Richard moved gracefully, plating for the guests with practiced hands. Each movement was precise, controlled, perfect. Yet in the subtle gestures, the careful handling of the silverware and glasses, there was an undercurrent of menace, a suggestion of something waiting beneath the surface, invisible to all but the most perceptive eye. As Vanessa lifted her fork, she caught Richard's gaze. For a fleeting moment, something passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of distance, of unspoken tension. And though the conversation continued, though the laughter resumed, the seed had been planted. Cracks in the perfect facade had begun to appear, and the illusion of domestic bliss was starting to fracture. Richard exhaled slowly, letting the tension roll across his shoulders. Tonight, everything would proceed as planned, yet the smallest slip could ignite chaos. The dinner had begun, and with it, the quiet unraveling of appearances that would soon spiral into darkness. The first course arrived with the polite clatter of china and silver, steaming soups served in delicate porcelain bowls. Richard moved among the guests, offering polite words and gentle smiles, masking the storm that churned beneath his carefully composed exterior. The aroma of roasted turkey and spiced vegetables filled the room, mingling with the laughter and casual chatter, creating an eerie contrast to the darkness simmering in his mind. He watched Vanessa across the table, radiant and unaware, chatting effortlessly with Derek about baby names. Each word she spoke, each laugh that escaped her lips, felt like a betrayal he could taste. Richard's hands moved methodically, placing the dishes, adjusting a glass here, a napkin there, but his eyes never left her. The poison, concealed in a small vial tucked inside his coat pocket, pulsed in his thoughts like a heartbeat. An invisible weapon, precise, controlled, perfect. "Richard, could you pass the bread?" Vanessa asked, her voice light. "Of course," he replied smoothly, sliding the basket across to her. Every movement was polished, precise, measured. No one at the table suspected the tension coiled within him, nor the plan forming in his mind. As the family began eating, subtle signs of his meticulous preparation went unnoticed. Richard had lightly dusted the stuffing with the crystalline powder, just enough to start a slow, undetectable effect. He observed the guests with quiet intensity, noting the first subtle changes. A faint flush on Derek's face, a slightly awkward pause in Aunt Marcy's conversation, the nervous twitch of Uncle Peter's hand. The conversation continued, polite at first, veering into gentle teasing and anecdotes. Richard's smile never wavered, though inside anticipation and fury twisted together, a strange, intoxicating combination. He poured wine for the guests, swirling each glass carefully, observing the reflections of faces bathed in golden candlelight. The room shimmered with warmth, yet beneath it lay something lethal, hidden, inevitable. Vanessa's laughter rang out, bright and musical, but Richard noticed the slight hesitation in her voice. A shiver of satisfaction, dark and dangerous, slid through him. He had planned this meticulously, a slow unraveling of the evening, each sip, each bite orchestrated to reveal chaos in its own time. His control was absolute. The veneer of civility would crumble exactly as he intended. The first signs appeared almost imperceptibly. Derek coughed softly, a flush of colour spreading across his face. Aunt Marcy frowned, pressing a hand to her temple as if a sudden ache had arrived. Richard's eyes flicked to Vanessa, who suddenly paled slightly, her fork trembling in her hand. He felt a thrill of dark satisfaction, masking it with a polite comment about the cranberry sauce. "Richard, this stuffing is incredible," Vanessa said, forcing a smile. Her voice carried a note of something more, uncertainty, fear, and confusion, mingled in equal measure. "Thank you," he replied smoothly, pouring her another glass of wine. Each sip she took brought him closer to the crescendo he had envisioned, the perfect blend of domesticity and devastation. The room grew warmer with the flicker of candlelight and the hum of conversation. Yet Richard could feel the subtle shift in energy. Tension was beginning to crack the polished surface. A cough here, a pallor there, a nervous glance exchanged across the table. Small, imperceptible changes that heralded the unfolding horror. Richard remained composed, smiling politely, offering gentle reassurances, yet his mind raced, cataloguing each response, each tremor, each subtle sign of the poison's effects. He noted Derek's hand tightening around his fork, Uncle Peter's awkward laugh, Aunt Marcy's flushed cheeks. Vanessa's unease grew, and he watched her carefully, savoring the delicate balance between fear and disbelief. Time seemed to slow, the candle flames dancing against the walls like sinister sentinels. Richard's reflection in the polished silverware showed eyes dark and intense, focused on the chaos he had quietly unleashed. Each guest remained oblivious to the invisible thread he had pulled, each bite carrying them closer to the edge as, the main course ended, murmurs of discomfort began to ripple across the table. A cough, a sudden shift in posture, a pale hand pressed against a cheek. Richard's smile remained intact, his posture relaxed, but inside, anticipation and satisfaction coiled like a predator ready to strike. Tonight, the perfect Thanksgiving had been transformed into a carefully orchestrated tableau of suspense and terror. The final toast approached, glasses lifted, laughter mingling with the first stirrings of panic. Richard's gaze lingered on Vanessa, her beauty and innocence made sharper by the subtle terror creeping into her features. The stage was set, the dinner had begun, and with it, the slow unraveling of everything they had known as family, love, and trust. The first coughs broke the rhythm of polite conversation. Derek shifted in his chair, a hand pressed to his stomach, frowning as a wave of nausea hit him unexpectedly. Aunt Marcy clutched her forehead, murmuring something about dizziness. Uncle Peter's fork trembled in his hand, the skin of his face paling beneath the golden candlelight. The laughter and conversation that had filled the room moments ago now stuttered and faltered, replaced by puzzled glances and growing unease. Richard watched with meticulous detachment, every twitch and blush catalogued in his mind. To the family, he appeared concerned, hovering politely, offering water and gentle reassurances. His hands were steady, his voice calm, but inside, a dark thrill wound through him, a dangerous satisfaction at the invisible chaos he had orchestrated. The perfect veneer of civility remained intact, even as panic quietly sprouted at the edges. "Derek, are you all right?" Vanessa asked, her voice tight with concern. She reached across the table, placing a hand on his arm. Derek shook his head, sweat beading on his temple, a pale flush in his cheeks. I don't know. Dizzy," he stammered, his words trembling. Vanessa's eyes darted toward Richard, confusion and fear mingling in her gaze. "Richard, what's happening? Why does everyone suddenly look sick?" Richard forced a small, calming smile. "Maybe it's just the food. Too rich, too heavy. Everyone has eaten so much. Let's not panic." His tone was measured, reassuring, and yet every word carried an undertone of something far darker, a subtle manipulation, keeping the family from suspecting the truth too soon. The room descended into a disjointed symphony of discomfort. Plates rattled as hands trembled, wine glasses spilled, and a sudden cough punctuated the otherwise tense silence. Vanessa's fingers shook as she lifted her napkin, dabbing at her mouth. Her breath hitched, eyes wide with the dawning realization that something was horribly wrong. "Richard, something's wrong," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the mounting commotion. "Shh, it's all right," he replied softly, moving closer. His hand hovered near hers, not in comfort, but in quiet control, masking the intensity of his observations. "Breathe, just breathe. Maybe it's just indigestion. We'll figure it out." The first true collapse came swiftly. Derek slumped forward, his hand sliding from the table as he gagged violently. Gasps and screams rose around the dining room as Aunt Marcy and Uncle Peter turned pale, clutching at their stomachs. Vanessa's cry pierced through the chaos. "Derek, no!" She scrambled to help him, but her movements were clumsy, panic overtaking composure. Richard remained calm, his polished facade unbroken. He moved between guests, offering water, steadying hands, murmuring gentle reassurances, all while watching. the progression of illness with clinical precision. Each family member succumbed at slightly different rates, each reaction feeding into the drama he had carefully constructed. He catalogued the fear, the confusion, the helplessness, all under the guise of concern. The golden glow of the candles now cast harsher shadows, flickering across pale, sweating faces. The crystal glasses, once gleaming, now trembled in unsteady hands. The sound of splintered porcelain, shuffling chairs, and panicked whispers created a chaotic rhythm that echoed through the house, the very walls bearing witness to the unraveling of domestic order. Vanessa turned to Richard, her eyes wide with disbelief and terror. "Richard, why is this happening? What did you do?" Richard's lips curved into a small, controlled smile. "I don't know. Maybe it's just fate," he murmured, voice low and soothing, yet with a subtle undertone that sent a shiver through her. He watched her struggle between hope and horror, the delicate balance of fear and trust tilting ever more dangerously. Guests collapsed one by one, the once celebratory table transformed into a tableau of panic and weakness. Vomiting, groans, and clutching hands filled the air, each scene more chaotic than the last. Richard moved through it all with ghostly calm, orchestrating the subtle ebb and flow of order amid total disorder. As Vanessa knelt beside Derek, cradling his head in her lap, she glanced at Richard, searching his face for answers. But there were none. Only the cool, controlled gaze of a man who had planned every detail, who had mastered the art of deception. Fear and disbelief radiated from her, her mind struggling to reconcile the man she had loved with the orchestrator of this horror. Richard exhaled slowly, stepping back to observe the chaos, the weight of his meticulous orchestration finally manifest. The stage was set, the first acts complete, and the crescendo of terror had begun. Tonight, Thanksgiving had transformed from celebration to nightmare. Vanessa's hands trembled as she knelt beside Derek, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead. His eyes fluttered, confusion and pain mingling in a way that made her stomach churn. The rest of the family lay scattered across the room, pale, groaning, grasping at tables, chairs, anything steady. The air, once warm with the scent of roasted turkey and spiced cider, now hung heavy with panic, metallic with the faint tang of vomit and fear. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, and her eyes locked onto Richard. He stood near the head of the table, tall and composed, the perfect host once more. Yet there was a cold glint in his eyes that made her blood run cold. The mask of civility, the polite smiles, all of it. The facade had finally cracked, revealing something terrifying. "Richard," she whispered, voice trembling but sharp, carrying across the chaos. Why are they sick? What did you do?" He stepped forward slowly, hands raised slightly, an almost paternal expression on his face. "Vanessa, calm down. It's just a reaction. Perhaps something in the food went wrong. We'll fix it. We'll manage this." His tone was soothing, deliberate, calculated to calm her while keeping her off balance. "Don't lie to me," she snapped, taking a step closer. Her chest heaved as adrenaline coursed through her veins. "I saw the way you moved around the kitchen, the way you touched the dishes. Richard, tell me what you've done." Richard's smile remained gentle, almost tender, but his eyes betrayed the darkness within. "Vanessa, I only wanted to protect us, to regain control. You betrayed me, didn't you? You let something happen with Derek, something that should never have existed." Her breath caught. I didn't... Richard, it's complicated, but I never meant to hurt you. I love you." His gaze hardened, and the tension between them became palpable, a taut wire stretching across the room. "Love? This is what love looks like? Secrets? Betrayal? Lies hidden under your smiles?" He gestured broadly at the groaning, writhing figures around the table. "Look at them. Look at what's happening because of your choices, Because of your deceit. Vanessa staggered back, her hands shaking. No. Richard, please. They're family. You can't. I can, he interrupted sharply, voice rising, though still controlled. I've spent years maintaining this perfection, building this life, orchestrating every detail, and you destroyed it. Do you have any idea what that feels like? The world I controlled, slipping away, stolen right in front of me. Her eyes welled with tears, and she shook her head, barely able to speak. Richard, please, we can fix this. Call a doctor. Call someone. Richard exhaled slowly, stepping closer, his shadow falling over her in the flickering candlelight. Doctors, authorities, they'll come too late. Tonight, I have control. Tonight, I am the one who decides. And you'll have to face the consequences of your choices. Vanessa's body trembled, not just with fear for the family, but with a dawning, horrifying realization of the man she had married. The Richard she knew, the meticulous, charming, loving husband, was gone, replaced by someone unrecognizable, calm, calculating, and merciless. He reached out, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. His touch should have been comforting, but it felt like iron. I wanted to protect what's mine, he murmured, almost tenderly. You took it from me, and now we see what loyalty really costs. Her heart pounded, panic blending with sorrow and disbelief. She looked around at the chaos, the collapsed family, the glint of spilled wine, the overturned chairs, and felt the full weight of Richard's orchestration. The perfect veneer of Thanksgiving was obliterated, leaving only terror and confusion in its wake. Richard, what have you done? She whispered, voice breaking, as tears rolled down her cheeks. His gaze met hers, unwavering, icy, precise. What needed to be done? The tension between them crackled like lightning in the room, a storm of love, betrayal, and moral collapse. Vanessa took a shaky step back, realizing that the man she had trusted most was now the architect of this nightmare, the center of a darkness that had been quietly growing beneath the surface of their perfect life. The flames from the candles flickered across the polished surfaces, casting distorted shadows that danced across their faces, emphasizing the psychological chasm now separating them. And in that space, between betrayal and control, love and vengeance, life and death, the Thanksgiving she had once imagined was lost forever. The dining room had become a scene from a nightmare. Chairs toppled, wine glasses shattered, and the air was thick with panic, metallic with the scent of fear and bile. Derek lay sprawled across the floor, pale and sweating, his breath ragged. Aunt Marcy clutched the table edge, groaning, her face contorted with pain. Uncle Peter pressed his, hands to his stomach, eyes wide in disbelief. Vanessa knelt among them, trembling, trying to stabilize what little she could. But the chaos was overwhelming. Richard moved through the room like a conductor of terror, calm and precise amid the pandemonium. His eyes followed every movement, cataloguing the symptoms, noting the subtle progression of the poison's effects. To the family, he seemed like a man struggling to maintain order. But inside, he savored the calculated unfolding of his plan. The house, once a haven of elegance and laughter, now resonated with cries, gasps, and the discordant rhythm of panic. "Someone call an ambulance!" Vanessa screamed, her voice cracking as she shook Derek gently. Her tears fell freely, mixing with the sweat and vomit that dotted the floor. "Please, someone do something!" Richard's hand hovered near hers, almost reassuringly. "Vanessa, stay calm. Keep them hydrated. Move carefully. Panicking won't help." His tone was gentle, almost soothing, but each word carried a subtle assertion of dominance, a reminder that he controlled every aspect of the unfolding disaster. The guests writhed, some moaning, others clutching their heads, overwhelmed by the symptoms creeping through their bodies. The once vibrant table now resembled a battlefield. Silverware and china lay scattered, candles flickered, casting grotesque shadows on the walls, and the golden warmth of the house had turned cold, suffused with terror. Vanessa looked at Richard, her eyes wide, searching for understanding or guilt, but all she found was the mask of composure, the dark thrill hidden behind his calm exterior. "Richard, why? Why are you doing this?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "I told you. Loyalty has a cost," he replied quietly, moving closer, almost tenderly, placing a hand lightly on her arm. The touch, meant to comfort, felt like a cage. "You betrayed me. You made choices that destroyed everything. Tonight, you see the consequences." Vanessa's mind spun. She wanted to scream, to fight, to escape, but the horror unfolding around her pinned her in place. Each moan, each groan, each convulsion reinforced the magnitude of Richard's actions. This was not an accident or a moment of blind rage. It was deliberate, orchestrated, precise. Derek tried to sit up, his body shaking violently. "Richard! What is happening?" His voice barely carried over the chaos. Richard knelt beside him, offering a hand that Derek accepted weakly, too exhausted and ill to resist. "It's not your fault, Derek," Richard said softly. "But tonight, we see what betrayal costs." Vanessa stared at the scene, horror freezing her limbs. The polished floor, the crystal glasses, the gleaming silverware, all reminders of the domestic perfection Richard had maintained, now seemed grotesque, distorted. Every reflection, every shadow emphasized the magnitude of the collapse. Her gaze snapped back to Richard. "Stop this! You're killing them!" Her voice trembled with fury and despair. "I am restoring order," he said calmly, almost philosophical. "Control has been lost. Balance must be achieved. You'll understand one day, Vanessa. Perhaps not now, but the truth is clear." She shook her head violently. "I can't. This isn't love." She felt rage and fear mix in her chest, a desperate energy rising as she tried to comprehend the man she had married. The meticulous, charming husband now unrecognizable, consumed by obsession and vengeance. The room's chaos escalated. Derek's head lolled to one side. Aunt Marcy's hands trembled uncontrollably. Uncle Peter's vision blurred as he collapsed toward the floor. Vanessa screamed, reaching for Richard, trying to stop him. But he moved gracefully, his control absolute, observing each detail like a scientist watching an experiment unfold. For the first time, Vanessa realized she could not reason with him. The man she loved was gone, replaced by someone consumed by calculated fury, someone who believed his actions were justified, necessary, almost righteous. Panic surged in her chest, but beneath it grew determination, a resolve to survive, to save what she could. She backed toward the kitchen, scanning the room for anything she could use, any way to break the control Richard held. But every step brought her closer to the full weight of the horror. Every glance at the groaning, writhing family, reinforcing the cruel precision of his orchestration. Richard's eyes followed her, unblinking, calm, and unyielding. "Vanessa, stay. Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said softly, almost coaxing. But she could see the dark satisfaction flicker beneath his surface. The thrill of power, the meticulous execution of a plan that had begun months ago, culminating. Tonight, the collapse was complete. The Thanksgiving of laughter, family, and warmth had been obliterated. Richard stood amidst the chaos, master of the scene, his control absolute. Vanessa realized with a shudder that the battle was far from over. The real confrontation between them was only beginning. The first sound was the distant wail of sirens, faint at first, then swelling as they drew closer. For the neighbors, who had watched the night unfold in uneasy silence, it was the signal that the hidden rot within the house could no longer be ignored. For Richard, pacing the living room with sweat forming at his temples, it was the tolling of a bell he had spent years trying to silence. Narration pressed against the scene. When truth arrives, it rarely does so gently. It arrives with flashing lights, the grind of tires on gravel, the heavy footsteps of officers who come not to listen, but to uncover. And in those moments, even the most carefully constructed facades begin to fracture. The squad cars pulled up, headlights cutting through the night. Blue and red lights pulsed across the walls of the house, washing the garden in ghostly hues. Officers emerged quickly, trained for the uncertainty of domestic violence calls. To them, this was protocol. To Vanessa, still trembling on the floor, it was salvation, laced with fear. 2 paramedics entered first, rushing to Derek. His body was slumped against the hallway wall, eyes barely open, lips forming shapes that carried no sound. They lifted him gently, murmuring reassurances as if words alone could anchor him to life. Vanessa clutched the arm of an officer, her breath sharp and uneven. "Please, help him. My brother. He's slipping." Richard stood a few feet away, posture stiff, face pale. He tried to project calm, but his hands betrayed him, twitching at his sides. When the lead detective stepped forward, Richard forced a thin smile. "Sir," the detective said firmly, "we've had reports of violence inside this home. I'll need you to explain what happened here." Richard's voice wavered, though. He tried to mask it. "There's been a misunderstanding. Emotions ran high, but nothing that requires this." He gestured toward the officers filling the house, as though their very presence was an exaggeration. Vanessa's eyes snapped toward him, fury cracking through her grief. "A misunderstanding! You nearly killed him! You broke everything! Every promise, every bond. Stop lying, Richard. Just stop." The detective raised a hand, signaling silence. "We'll sort through this. Sir, I'll need you to come with me." Narration deepened. It is in these first confrontations where guilt often reveals itself, not through confessions but through the inability to maintain composure. Richard's shoulders sagged as though the weight of years had suddenly found him. The mask slipped, not in words, but in silence. Inside the house, the atmosphere was suffocating. Shards of glass littered the floor, a lamp lay toppled, and dark stains marked the carpet where Derek had collapsed. Every detail screamed of violence and control torn apart. The officers documented quietly, flashes from cameras bursting like artificial lightning, freezing the chaos in still frames that would later resurface in court. Richard tried to protest as handcuffs were secured around his wrists. "You don't understand," he said, voice breaking. "Everything I did to keep this family together." The detective's reply was cold, almost weary. Families don't survive on fear. They survive on truth. As Richard was led, outside, neighbors peeked from windows, faces half hidden by curtains. For years they had suspected, whispered, but never intervened. Now, the spectacle of justice played out under flashing lights, and their silence felt like complicity. Vanessa followed the paramedics as they wheeled Derek toward the ambulance. She brushed his hand with trembling fingers. His eyes fluttered, and for the briefest moment, he seemed to recognize her. His lips parted. "Still, not free," he whispered, before slipping into unconsciousness. The words struck Vanessa like glass splinters. They were not only a reflection of his suffering, but of the years they had all endured. Years bound by Richard's dominance and the unspoken fractures within their family. Narration lingered. Justice does not heal immediately. It arrives as disruption, as exposure, dragging wounds into light. Healing, if it comes, must crawl from the wreckage of truth revealed. The night air outside was sharp, biting against Vanessa's skin as she stood by the ambulance. Officers moved around her, efficient, detached, yet the weight of what had happened pressed against her chest. She felt both relief and devastation. Relief that Richard could no longer hide behind control. Devastation that it had taken blood and betrayal to reach this moment. Inside the police car, Richard sat motionless, his reflection fractured in the glass. The city lights blurred as the vehicle pulled away, carrying him toward the machinery of justice. For the first time in years, He was not in control, and in that loss, his composure crumbled entirely. Tears welled, not of innocence denied, but of inevitability finally catching up to him. The scene closed with Vanessa standing alone at the curb, the ambulance pulling away with her brother, the patrol cars dispersing. The house behind her loomed in silence, its broken windows reflecting the last flash of blue light before darkness returned. Narration pressed the final note. Justice had arrived, but it was not triumph. It was consequence, messy, painful, necessary. The scars it left would outlast the flashing lights, written not in records but in memory. And as the street returned to quiet, the night held its breath, carrying forward the weight of everything broken. The sirens faded, but the echoes remained. Richard's arrest had unfolded under the flood of police lights, and now the world rushed in to claim the story. By morning, the house that once concealed the family's turmoil became a stage for reporters, their cameras blinking like predatory eyes. Headlines spread quickly. Family man arrested in domestic tragedy. Violence behind closed doors. Narration pressed the moment. The truth, once hidden, had become public property, and with it came judgment, not only in court, but in whispers, articles, and the ceaseless churn of speculation. Vanessa moved between realities. Her brother in a hospital bed, her stepfather in custody, her mother's memory lingering like a shadow across every hallway. She was both survivor and witness, yet neither role gave her peace. Inside the hospital, Derek's room hummed with the low rhythm of machines. His face was pale, lips dry, but the rise and fall of his chest signaled a fragile persistence. Vanessa sat at his bedside holding his limp hand, speaking softly, though she knew he drifted between consciousness and dreams. "Stay with me, Derek," she whispered. "We've lost too much already. Don't let him take you too." Her words filled the silence, but his only reply was the faint flicker of his eyelids. Narration lingered. Hospitals are places of both hope and resignation, corridors where families measure time not in hours, but in breaths. For Vanessa, each beep of the monitor reminded her of what had been broken and what might never be repaired. Downstairs, reporters gathered near the entrance, microphones raised, their questions blunt and merciless. "Do you blame Richard entirely? Will Derek testify? Do you feel justice is being served?"